Okay, let's hear from our panel. Joining us now from New York is Ali Cinar. He is president of the Turkish Heritage Organization. With me here in the studio is Aykan Erdemir. He is a former member of the Turkish Parliament, and he is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Joining us from London is Hakan Camuz. He is a Turkish political analyst and international legal consultant. And with us here in the studio too is Giran Ozcan. He is the US representative for Turkey's People's Democratic Party, the HDP. Welcome to all of you to the show. Ali Cinar, let me start with you. President Erdogan has won this election, getting about 53% of the vote. There were some who thought that this might go to a runoff election, but clearly he's won here with over 50% of the vote. What do you make of the victory?
The winner is Turkish democracy in Turkey. There were 50 million votes, up to 90% of the turnout for the election. So I think it was a fair election. The big news was the Nationalist Party, MHP, had 11% of the votes, which wasn't expecting. And now AK Party and MHP will have a coalition in the Turkish Parliament. But the good news is there will be 5 parties in the Turkish Parliament, which is a check and balance position. So I think the winner, as I said, is the Turkish democracy overall.
Aykan, let's listen to what President Erdogan had to say shortly after his victory. Let's watch.
The winner of this election is democracy, the national will, our nation itself. The winner of this election is each and every individual of my 81 million citizens.
Aykan, there we heard it again. The winner in this election is Turkish democracy. President Erdogan will also assume sweeping powers now as president. And the main opposition candidate also said that this election was unjust. We've also heard criticism from the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which said that the election was not fair, that there was unfairness on the ownership of the media and how it was used in this election. What do you make of the powers that the new president will take on?
Now, first of all, this was a victory of the ballot box democracy. If we reduce democracy to the ballot box, right, yes, in a relatively free election, there is that. But at the same time, this was one of the most unfair elections. The playing field was unlevel. So I think that will continue to haunt Turkish democracy. When it comes to the president's sweeping powers, we will see that he will not only amass executive powers, but also sweeping legislative and judicial powers. And a parliament with diminished capacity will have little opportunity to check and balance Erdogan's one-man rule.
Hakan Camuz, what is your opinion on the outcome of this election and this criticism that we're hearing that this is too much power concentrated in the hands of one man?
It's the same story being told over and over again by the very same guests that you have in the studio. Every time there's an election in Turkey and then we come to your program, we talk about these things. I mean, get over it. He wins every time he goes into election. He is a popular leader. He is well trusted. Elections are not disputed at all. This is a democracy. If you believe in it, and you believe in the election, he gets elected. And you just basically learn how to lose the election. They keep losing it, and they're blaming everything else but their own failures of coming up with the new ideas to show electorate in Turkey what they stand for. Stop complaining, come up with the new policies, new ideas, enlighten the politics in Turkey. The contribution of Turkish voters to the progress of democracy in Turkey is almost 84%. People turn up to vote, and they vote for him. So nobody disputes the functionality of the democracy and the power that it gives to the selected government, in this case, a government of Recep Tayyip Erdogan. What are we talking about? We have to come to understand that fair election takes place, he gets elected, he is popular. Come up with new ideas rather than just criticizing.
Okay, Giran, let me ask you firstly, do you believe that this election was free and fair?
Well, I don't think anyone can actually argue that in their right mind. I mean, just purely out of facts I can give, our candidate ran his campaign from behind bars, although he has no charges that have been proved in any criminal court, any court in Turkey, but our leader ran his campaign from behind bars. The uneven playing field that Aykan was talking about as well. I mean, we know that the media is 90% under the control of Erdogan. So, I mean, your guest from London, I understand this point, but if he's so popular, which he is, I mean, he gets a sizable portion of the vote. But if a leader is so popular, then why would he require such tactics to suppress the opposition to such an extent? So I think observers from all over the world know that there is something going on in Turkey in which the president is just not allowing for the opposition to conduct its own politics freely.
Right. Let me ask you this. Does your party, the Kurdish People's Democratic Party, does it accept the legitimacy of this election? Because you scored over 12%. You went over that threshold of 10% to get representation in Parliament. Will your members now take their seats in Parliament?
Well, I think, yes, they will. And I think questioning the fairness of an election and questioning its legitimacy are two different things. Now, these are elections in which our party contested. So this is a de facto acceptance of the legitimacy of the election. But having criticisms in the, its conduct, how it was conducted, the run-up to the elections, the campaigns, and the suppression that's going on across the whole of the country is a completely different issue to just questioning the legitimacy of the election.
Okay, Ali Cinar, let me get your view on this.
Can I come back on this, Anand?
I'll get to you, Hakan. I'll give you a chance just now. I want to get to Ali Cinar in New York, rather. These elections took place under a state of emergency that was declared after that failed military coup in 2016. We still have tens of thousands of people who were detained after the election. Could a fair election be held under these conditions?
As I said, it was a fairly election. There were 8 international organizations with 415 observers. And today, the opponent, Muharrem İnce, accepted the results that Erdogan won the election. Right. So I don't understand why it's coming that it's not a fairly election. It was a fairly election. And if the opponent candidates were strong enough to beat Erdogan, which they couldn't, so I think it's wrong. It's wrong. And then I would like to highlight that regarding the Kurdish leader, Selahattin Demirtas, and it's not HDP that only have the Kurdish members now. AK Party, CHP has also Kurdish origin members in the Turkish Parliament. So I wouldn't just label it as a Kurdish party. There are the Kurdish origin members in the Turkish Parliament. And if Selahattin Demirtas recognized PKK as a terrorist organization, then we could talk differently. Can you imagine members of Congress who doesn't recognize Al-Qaeda or ISIS as a terrorist organization?
Right.
Can you imagine in the United States? So the explanation from HDP is not accurate.
Hakan Camuz told us a moment ago that this was not about control of the media or the fairness of the election. It was the fact that the opposition didn't bring fresh ideas to attract voters. What do you make of that?
I think we had an unprecedented development in these elections. The opposition across the political spectrum, right to left, secular to religious, Kurdish to Turkish, they all came together. There was a cordial dialogue and cooperation between them. And there was a kind of a dynamic candidate who received 30% of the vote. And all of this happened despite the government's stronghold, chokehold over the media, 90% control, right. Little or no airtime on state TV. So we have to distinguish between two different issues. As I said, free elections is one issue, fair elections is another issue. Yes, Turkish citizens were free to go to the polls for the most part to vote, and the counting was to a great extent accurate, to a great extent. But fairness, there was no fairness to speak about because the playing field was completely uneven. And we will, of course, continue to criticize this because that's what distinguishes a democracy from an authoritarian regime.
Hakan Camuz, let's look at some of the core issues on which this election was fought. Number one, the economy, the Turkish economy. President Erdogan says that these new powers that he now takes on as president will give him a better shot at tackling the Turkish economy. What does his win in this election mean for Turkey's economic performance?
Undeniable. There has to be economic challenges that's coming up that needs to be dealt with. One of the complaints that we always had for 16 years of AK Party government time period that we've gone through in the past has been the bureaucracy's hold over how you can actually function and operate the government day-to-day businesses, and it's really, really cumbersome and difficult. I don't have time to explain to you in detail how bad it is. So hopefully this new system that President Erdogan brings with this new election is going to be more smooth and more operative environment that we can actually run the business of government day to day. I'm not blaming the economic challenges that Turkey will face on bureaucracy only, don't get me wrong. But had it been like this, say 5-10 years ago, I believe the running of the country would have been as difficult as it is. So one of the first things we're looking forward to is new model of government that will be run by the elected president and his cabinet in the future. There will be other challenges coming in. But I'll tell you, the more positive side, you have 5 different parties in the parliament. The entire color of Turkish populations are in the parliament. This is a good, healthy democracy. HDP needs to distance itself from a terrorist organization, PKK, that it closely allies itself with. That's the only thing that I expected of them. Nobody denies the rights of people in Turkey to reflect their political views in the parliament, elected in a democratic way. And that's what's happening. This is a good thing. Let's not spoil it by partisan statements and somehow trying to criticize. You know, the press isn't the only thing that allows you to win election. There's social media, there's meetings that happen to. Opposition parties held more public meetings than the current government in there.
Hakan, do you want to respond to the economic challenges very quickly?
Now, I think the key issue for the economy is good governance, the lack of good governance, lack of rule of law, lack of private property rights. We are seeing capital flight from Turkey. We are seeing diminishing investor confidence. And I think to remedy these, Turkey needs to return to rule of law, return to due process, return to democracy and inclusive governance. And that involves, of course, making sure the HDP, the pro-Kurdish HDP, is part of the consensus building process. Because no Turkish economy that leaves out major stakeholders can provide confidence to investors both at home and abroad.
I want to get back to that point of consensus building and unity, but first we are going to take a short break. Stay with us on The Heat as we discuss the Turkish elections.